Yeah, this was when Jack was going through some self-injurious behavior, which he has occasionally struggled with, and this was during a particularly rough time. So, dear God, I'm afraid. I've always believed the world is broken and that you didn't break it, that you're the great restorer, that your son came to make all things new. This has been my conclusion after years of study and thought, but I have to admit I'm biased on this point because I desperately want to believe it. I need to believe that you are truly, wholly good, that you don't desire innocent children to live frantic and bruised, that you don't lock up a boy's future behind impaired speech centers in the brain. I don't know how to help my son. I don't know how to pray. I can't just pray, heal my son, because I don't even know what that means anymore. I don't know what anything means. So I won't pray anything too bold for now. Instead, I will just remind you that your name is Emmanuel, which means God with us. Come close, Emmanuel. Prince of Peace, draw near to my son and give him rest. Amen.
Welcome to Stories of Hope in Hard Times, the show that explores how people endure and even thrive in difficult times, all with God's help. I'm your host, Tamara K. Anderson. Join me on a journey to find inspiring stories of hope and wisdom learned in life's hardest moments. Today I'm excited to introduce a man who grew up in the piney woods of East Texas and is currently an associate pastor of Christ Center Church in Junction City, Oregon, and that's near Eugene. He has served on staff for many years with Youth with a Mission. He's been married for nearly 20 years and has 5 amazing children. He has his passion for writing, and we're going to talk about his book a little bit later. And he is very creative and a visual storyteller. In fact, he often speaks about the intersection of faith and special needs due to the fact that he has a son on the autism spectrum. And so I'm excited to introduce to you Mr. Jason Hague. Jason, are you ready to share your story of hope?
I am.
This is awesome. So I'm excited because during this Autism Awareness Month, I thought it would be great to interview someone else who has a child on the autism spectrum. And I've been following Jason for several years on Facebook. And when I reached out to him, he said, yes. So here we are. And we're going to talk a little bit about his son, Jack, and his book, Aching Joy, which I highly, highly recommend. It's amazing. And I really related to it because I feel like we were on a lot of the same journey, me with my sons on the autism spectrum and Jason with his son also on the autism spectrum. So this is going to be a great interview. So Jason, let's start off talking about Jack's diagnosis. Why don't you take us there to how he started out and how he changed?
Yeah, our story with Jack is one of those. It's not everybody's autism story, but you hear it a lot of a child developing fairly normally for the first couple of years, and then everything going away, and that was pretty dramatic for us. He was a very lively and interactive child, and but when he was about 1.5 to 2, he just started to drift. And I didn't even notice it at first. We lived in a really beautiful place, and so he would take walks with us all the time, and he was just all interested in his surroundings. So it didn't even occur to me that he wasn't interacting with us very much anymore, until my friend Nathan said, I don't think I've ever made eye contact with Jack before. Mm-hmm. And so I started paying attention, and it started worrying me because I realized, wait a minute, this is true. He's not noticing other people, and then he started to notice us less and less. And so, we were sure that this couldn't be autism. This had to be, something else. And so we're doing a bit of research here and there. And then, he'd have little gains, and we would say, oh, good. See, everything's totally fine. And then they would just go away. And it was my mom who emailed me one day and said, I think Jack has autism, and I think you are in denial. So I laughed when she said it, which is, I suppose that's what people in denial do when they're accused of being in denial. And so pretty soon we had to face the fact that, no, this is true. And so we went and we got his diagnosis when he was 3. And, it's been a journey since then.
Yeah. So I also went through a long stage of denial. I think my husband accepted the fact that Nathan had autism way before I did. And so that is a hard place to be. When the diagnosis was pronounced, how did that affect you?
It was a real blow. It was, I grew up in my adult life, waiting for my first son. We had 2 daughters, and I had this beautiful relationship with them, and it was amazing. And my oldest, I think, was 5 at the time when Jack was born, and so they sort of came out speaking Elizabethan English. It was just they loved to talk and they loved to interact, and so I just kind of took it for granted that my son was going to be able to do that too. And we're going to be able to share that kind of thing. But it was more than that because, we came from a very, a loud, excitable family who loved sports and all these things. So, I'm always picturing, we're going to do what we do with my family. On Sunday afternoons, we're going to watch football, and then we're going to go outside and we're going to play, and we're going to all of these things. I just had these visions in my head about what fatherhood was going to be like, especially when my first boy came along. But when that diagnosis hit, it sort of started to sink in on me, like all of those things that you expected, you're going to have to recalibrate all of that because it might never happen. And you're going to have to find a way to deal with that. And so I didn't react well. I went through that season of denial, and when it finally came, I'm like, okay, fine. And I went through a brief season of being angry with God and having it out with God. And then finally, after that, it was just this long season of sadness. And there was numbness kind of, in that too. It was sort of these muted feelings, except you'd have these moments of just such sadness and not sure. I wasn't sure how to deal with it. I mean, it really was grief.
Yes.
And I know a lot of people don't like to hear that term in this kind of context because, we all want to be able to celebrate our children and their uniqueness and things like that. But I simply wasn't able to do that. I just wasn't there. And so it took me a really long time to work through that.
Yeah, and I think it's important that you bring that up. It's something I also brought up in my book. Just that loss of the dream of what your child is going to be like. And I know it's something totally imaginary in our heads, but we grieve that child we will never raise. And it's part of the process. And I'm glad to know I'm not the only one that feels that way or that went through that. And so I think this is something that's common among many, many people, and it doesn't have to necessarily be that their child was diagnosed with autism. Maybe there was a different diagnosis that was pronounced, not only in a child, but in a family. What if a spouse gets cancer? You grieve the loss of that life you envisioned maybe in the future. It's going to have to change. And so I think that we need to call it what it is. It really is grief of what that image that we're losing. And I'm so glad that you brought that up because I think so many parents go through it, but they just don't realize that's what it is until probably they've completely gone through it and come out on the other end. And then someday they read about the grief cycle like me and go, oh my word, that's what it was.
I was doing that. Yeah. Yeah. And I think also, just compounded with that is the fact that, it is sort of a controversial thing to mention as a parent. It's not at all controversial to mention when there it's a disease or something like this.
Right.
we understand. But when you're dealing with either a mental health issue or something like autism, that kind of thing, it's so much tied more into identity and personality and these kinds of things. So it's we end up tiptoeing around it because we don't want to offend or people are like, you should be happy, you should be rejoicing about your child and the beauty that they bring. But here's the thing, I've got 5 kids. I've been in ministry for almost 20 years. And in my experience, you just can't tell someone how they ought to feel.
No,
it doesn't work. Feelings don't operate. They don't sing on command. So if you are feeling sorrow, if you have grief, you can't just like, oh, but look at the beautiful things about my child and how they're different. Those things are there, and we hope and pray that we can get past some of the heavy stuff so that we can see the beauty and we can see all of the gifts and the uniqueness and all of these things. But you have to be able to deal with the thing you're actually dealing with.
Yes.
So you can't circumvent that grief. If it's there, you need to acknowledge it. Both, with God, to say, God, I'm angry with you.
Yeah.
If that's the case, if you're already angry, let's just admit it. And then with ourselves and say, I am very sad.
Yes.
That kind of thing is so helpful to acknowledge what it actually is and then go through the process of working through it.
Yeah. And I think another myth that we just need to debunk is that it is normal when you're in the grief cycle to be angry with God. Yeah. Because I also felt that way. And you know what? He's big enough to take it. And he loves us enough to want to help us get through that and move on towards peace. So
yeah. Well, you say he's big enough. I know. I use the term in my book. It's like we have this upward condescension. It's like, oh, God, I don't want to tell you about my grief because I'm afraid you're going to be mad or can't handle it. And it's like, it's so silly because he sees it already. Mm-hmm. He sees it. And, he's seen anger before and he's seen disappointment and disillusion, all of these things. So if it's there, let's just tell him that it's there.
Yeah.
It's just such a weird quirk we have.
I know,
and it is common in these kinds of cases to question and say, why God? It's common to have these feelings bubble up. And instead of smothering them, I think it's much more healthy to give them to him in prayer and say, this is what I'm feeling. Please don't strike me with lightning, but here's the way that I feel right now. So can you just come into this place? I mean, that's what the psalmist does all the way through the book. So
I know, isn't that amazing? And so just be real with God, and He will help you through it. I think that's probably just one of the most amazing lessons to learn going through that cycle, as you described. So that's fantastic. What other lessons have you learned going on this journey with Jack?
Oh man, there's so many unexpected gifts that you find along the way.
Yes.
For me, this is a common thing, I think, for special needs parents, but it's something that didn't come naturally to me, and that was to actually look for the small victories and to celebrate them.
Yes.
Because here's what happens, if you're fixating, my son is 13 now, and he's still functionally nonverbal. He has some words here and there, and he'll use, movie lines and things like this. But functionally, he's nonverbal. He's just he can't tell us how he feels, any of this kind of thing. So for me, that's been the big thing of like, Lord, give my son words. Help us to be able to relate. Help us to be able to have conversation. And so as I pray for that thing, and if I'm not seeing traction in there, then I can very easily just sink down and into that sadness again and go back into that depressed place. But if I'm actually looking for the daily victories, that all changes. Because you can continue to pray for the big thing, but if you can actually see the small things as well, like that's a game changer. So, and my wife was so much better at this than I was from the beginning. She would always say, oh, look what the things that he's learning. And I would say, look, did you see that meltdown he had today? Like, did you see that? And I really thought she was in denial. And I think she might have erred a little bit more to that side, and I would have erred the other way. But she was right. She was seeing things, and I wasn't, because I was looking so much at the harsh reality of the situation. And one of the things I had to come to grips with was look, having intellectual integrity is a really big deal to me. Like, I want to say things as they really are. I don't want to sugarcoat it. I want to say, look, this is the reality. And so that's why I was always like, look, but here's the reality. Things are hard. But there was also this other side of the reality that, you know what? Yeah, but some things are really good, even in the midst of the hardness. So let's look for those things as well. If you're gonna talk about how hard things are, then do that, but you've got to bring the other side as well, because that's every bit as real. So my wife was better at those things, and then I started being able to open my eyes a little bit and say, would you look at that? Would you look at the way he just waved to me when he got on the bus? Hey, that's really great. That's a victory today, and I need to treat it as such. I can't go on and say, oh, woe is me, everything is terrible, because not everything is terrible. Some things are super hard, yes, but some things are also good.
Yeah, I love that. And so probably a good summary of what you just said is continue to pray for those things that you're hoping he will gain, but also pray that you can see the small miracles.
Absolutely.
I love that. There's so much wisdom in that, because even in the darkest times, we can see tiny miracles in our lives if we're looking for them.
Absolutely.
No, that's fantastic. Is there any other lesson that you learned that you would like to share?
I think I never realized how much I needed people before this. And I was a people person, but I didn't realize, like, no, you can't do this by yourself. And I think in this day and age, so much of the pop psychology is all about, you can do this. You are made for this, this kind of thing of whatever it is. You can, climb every mountain, blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
And the thing that I've realized is, no, this thing is actually just too big for me. Like, I can't carry this on my own. And I actually really need community in my life. I need people. And, early on in that dark stage, in that depressed time, my wife would always say, hey, the guys are going out. Why don't you go with them? I'd be like, I don't want to do that right now. I'm fine. And she's like, you know what? You need to go. And the times that I heeded that, I never regretted it. I was always like, oh, wow, you're right. I did need that. So just having friends around, having other people to be able to talk to and just vent to was so necessary, and our church community became that for us. They were just we do a lot of speaking on this kind of thing now, but they were the model of like how to embrace a family going through peculiar kind of difficulties. They were amazing, and how people try to do this kind of thing without community, I don't understand, and I wish that everybody could experience what we have, because it was beautiful.
Yeah, that is so true. We learned something similar as we were raising Nathan and Jacob. It takes a village. And I really don't think God meant for us to go through all of this on our own. Like you said, it is too heavy. And so we pray for God to help us. And how else is he going to help us if not through the people that surround us, So he's going to send people to answer our prayer.
Right. Yeah.
So that is so true and so wise. And I love you talk a little bit in your book about it being too big and more than you can handle. And so I love when you dive into that because it is. It's often too big for us to handle.
Right.
So it's good. God doesn't leave us alone. Let me ask you, you have some really sweet, I think you read a letter once in your book. I'm seeing if I can find it. That really, really touched me.
Is it the letter to God?
Dear God, I am afraid, that one.
Yeah, is that what you're talking about?
Yes. Do you mind reading that for us? It's on page 135, 136 of your book.
Yeah, this was when Jack was going through some self-injurious behavior, which he has occasionally struggled with, and this was during a particularly rough time. So, dear God, I'm afraid. I've always believed the world is broken and that you didn't break it, that you're the great restorer, that your Son came to make all things new. This has been my conclusion after years of study and thought, but I have to admit I'm biased on this point because I desperately want to believe it. I need to believe that you are truly, wholly good, that you don't desire innocent children to live frantic and bruised, that you don't lock up a boy's future behind impaired speech centers in the brain. I don't know how to help my son. I don't know how to pray. I can't just pray, heal my son, because I don't even know what that means anymore. I don't know what anything means. So I won't pray anything too bold for now. Instead, I will just remind you that your name is Emmanuel, which means God with us. Come close, Emmanuel. Prince of Peace, draw near to my son and give him rest. Amen.
I'm going to get teary just hearing you read that. I love the emotion behind that because you can feel your sorrow and your grief and the lack of understanding. And I think that's how we often feel in life. You know, when God gives us a problem that is too big for us to handle.
Yeah. And
so I'm thankful that you shared that.
Yeah, I actually read that in a sermon, and I just completely broke down on stage. It was pretty ugly.
But it's real.
Yeah, and the way people responded, my church responded. I had a couple of the elders that came and got on both sides of me there, and people just like embraced me so much that day, and it really bonded us together. But you're right when you say it's too big for us to handle, and it makes me think of that cliche that we all hear in this realm, that God never gives you anything you can't handle, and it's just not true. I just don't even know where it comes. I mean, it's a weak attempt at the Corinthians verse about not being tempted beyond what you can bear, but this is not what we're talking about. So it going through things like this, going through all kinds of things, it's just bigger than we can handle. So what are we going to do about it? We need to. That's what we need to cry out to God, and we need to have our communities come around us and add strength to us, because we just were not meant to live this life alone.
I think this also speaks to the importance of being real when we are suffering. So often in our society, people say, "Hey, how you doing?" And our answer, I'm fine.
Fine.
I'm fine. But when we really open up, I think that's when people begin to know how to help us.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And so
absolutely.
I think that's probably one of the lessons I learned reading that beautiful letter you wrote there is it's important to let people know how we're really doing.
Absolutely.
Especially if we're praying for help.
Yeah.
We got to let them know,
Yeah. And, I think this can be tricky because everybody wants to have a community that understands them. And that's actually really, really difficult because even those who are raising a special needs child, for instance, they might still have completely different experiences than I do with Jack. So even if we're walking parallel paths, you're never going to fully understand one another. So because of that, because it's so hard to find people who truly get it, a lot of times, families like ours end up not actually finding community because they can't find that perfect person or that perfect group. So it's I think in order to get that community that we desire, you have to open up and share. You have to be able to say, listen, I know you might not be able to relate to this, so I'm just going to tell you this is what's going on, and this is really, really hard. In other words, looking for people who, quote, get it, I think sometimes is overrated. I mean, it's great when you can find it. Don't get me wrong. And I'm all for support groups, and some of the best, friends we have are people who have gone through something like this and we can relate with. But I have a whole bunch of other friends that have way different trials and hardships than me. But they listen. And that has been an absolute lifesaver, because they know how to be there for me because I actually share, So I think you're exactly right. We have to be able to open up and tell people where we're actually at. And if we don't, we're going to miss out on community. So I think we need to adjust our expectations sometimes. Does that make sense?
Yes.
We need to adjust those expectations. Like, you're not going to find someone who fully, completely gets it. And if you do, God bless you. Good for you. I really am happy. But you might not find that. So, I have dear friends I always think of who are foster parents, and they deal with all kinds of really difficult stuff. And I love it when they tell me about it. I can't say, I know exactly what that's like to pour your love onto a child that you might not even be able, that's not going to be there for very long, and to have your heart broken again. And I don't know what that's like. But I so love that they tell me, because that's how community is formed. It's sharing those stories. So I think it's so important that we actually open up and say, I just want to tell you what this is like. Can you share this with me? Can you share this burden? Can you help me carry this? And can you celebrate this victory with me? I think that's beautiful community when that can happen.
Yes, it is. So we're grateful for people, for good people that God places in our paths. We are going to take a quick break, but when we get back, we'll have Jason tell a little bit about a breakthrough they had with Jack and a viral video that Jason was able to make. So stay tuned. How many of you out there feel like your life is chaotic, crazy, and completely awful compared to the norm? What if I were to tell you that you are normal for you? I am so excited to announce that my book, Normal for Me by Tamara K. Anderson, will be released April of 2019 to celebrate Autism Awareness Month. This book took me 10 years to write, and I share 20 years worth of lessons learned in my life detours, including being in a car accident and having 2 of my children diagnosed on the autism spectrum. In this book, I share the secrets of how I made it from despair to peace with God's help. I invite you to check out my website, tamarakanderson.com, and sign up for my twice-a-month newsletter. Doing this was going to give you the inside scoop on how you can get a free electronic copy of my book during the month of April. So sign up today and hope on. You shared in your book the story of Jack and having a breakthrough with him reading a book.
Yeah.
Why don't you share a little bit of that breakthrough and what it meant to you?
As alluded to before, the cry of my heart was that we would be able to have connection, and that he would understand our relationship. And for years, it just seemed like he didn't. I would kind of go through the motions, and I would, take him to school every day, and I'd hold his hand as we walked around to the front entrance and come in, and I try to talk to him, and he would just, kind of mumble something, not say anything. And we just have these daily routines. I give him his bath and, try to play with him. He's just not interested. So that always, even though he was gaining in some ways, it always just stung. And so we just continue to pray, Lord, you created us for relationship. And I would love for him to understand how much we love him, how much his family loves him, how much I love him. And so that just seemed to go unanswered for a really long time. And one day he brought a book home from the library, and it was this little board book with 2 penguins on it, and it was called I Like It When. And it was he was I think just about to turn 8 at the time, and it was probably a book for like 3 or 4-year-olds, kindergarten maybe at the latest. And so he had tried to sneak it into his backpack because he liked it so much, and his teacher said, "You can check it out. Go ahead and take it home," which in itself is really funny because he doesn't ever get that excited about that kind of thing. And so he brought it home and started making this comment. And my wife texts me. She's like, "You've got to come home and see this." So I came. I think it was in the middle of the day. I rushed home. I'm like, okay, what is this all about? And so here he is. He's laying up in his top bunk, and he's got the book open, and he's just laughing, looking at this book. He's just laughing and laughing. And so I come over and go, "Hey, what's up, bud?" And this book, on every page, it has a big penguin and a little penguin. And it's just like daily kind of stuff, it shows them walking and holding their fins together. And is it fins? What do they have? Wings, I guess. Anyway, whatever. Yeah. And it says, "I like it when you hold my hand." And so in every one there was a different page, and he's laughing, and then he points to the little penguin and then to the big one and says, "Jack and Daddy." Oh. And then he flips the page, and it's like, "I like it when we splash about," and it shows the big penguin giving the little one a bath, and he says, "Jack and Daddy." And he flips to every page and sees these scenarios that we actually shared, and says, "Jack and Daddy." And he's just laughing because he's just like, "Hey, look what I see in this. This is exactly the stuff that we do." And I am just in a puddle of tears because he had never used any conceptual language like that ever. I mean, here he is giving a metaphor. He's like, "I see
here we are."
Dad. And so that was a massive, massive thing for me in our relationship. I don't know how much it meant to him. I think it did mean a lot to him because he's had a thing for penguins ever since then. But it was such a huge thing for me because I realized God had answered my biggest prayer, which was, "Lord, help him to understand that relationship." And he was showing me right there, "Oh yeah, Dad, I do. I see us. This is who we are right here. I see all the things we do, and I think it's awesome."
And that is so amazing. I know the moments that I feel like I'm really connecting with our nonverbal son, Nathan, they're few and far between, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And so the miracles, when they happen, we have to cling to those as, okay, this is an answer to prayer. This is maybe something that I needed more than he did.
Right.
But it's good to know that, I don't know, I can often look in my son Nathan's eyes and see that there's so much going on in there that it's almost like they're trapped in their own little bodies, that they can't express it. They can't get it out. And I love that your Jack quotes movies because that's what my Nathan does as well. And so sometimes we can glean what he's thinking and feeling by the quotes that he's saying. And so we have to really pay attention. Oh, wait, what did he just say? And just try to figure out, oh, I think he's sad right now. Or he's happy, or he wants to go home, or whatever it is. But
isn't it great to be able to decode those things, though?
Yes.
It's like celebration sets off in the household.
I know. It really is decoding, though, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Trying to figure out, this is what he's telling me here. And sometimes one of my son Nathan's favorite books when he was little, and even to this day, he'll still pull it out. And we've gone through actually several versions of the book because he'll read it until they fall apart. And then I have to buy a new one. But is The Berenstain Bears and the Spooky Old Tree. Just simple little children's book. It has like one sentence on each page. But at the very end of this book, these little kids have gone through the spooky old tree. They run home to mom to save them. And it says, "Home again, safe at last." And so he will quote that if we're out and about, that home again, safe at last. He wants to go home.
Wow.
He feels, and so he feels that sense sometimes when we leave the house that it's crazy and scary and he wants to go home. And so he'll quote the book. So it's neat when you can find these little clues of how they're trying to communicate with you. And it's an answer to prayer.
Yeah, no question.
That is awesome. So the way I found you online was through a video that you made about your son Jack, and it was at the ocean. And I know it
Yeah.
went viral. But would you mind telling us a little bit about that? And we'll be sure to include a link to it in the show notes so people can watch it because it is so moving and powerful.
Thank you. Yeah, it was 2016. I had just wrote this poem, and I don't really know. I was just walking around listening to some music one day, and I just sort of came to me as I want to express how I feel about my son, and I want to show people. And so I went down with my friend Robert, who is a photographer and a composer. It's really great when you have friends that are so talented.
I know, right?
And so I said, hey, can you help me film this thing? And he had just gotten this drone, and so he was super excited to put this up in the air. So I wanted to express my partly, sort of kind of a manifesto of this is the way that I feel about all these online discussions. I get so in arguments, I get so sick of them, arguments over language. Is he autistic or does he have autism? That kind of thing. I know those are valid and important conversations many times. So I'm not saying it doesn't matter. But it's just so much of that is confusing. Mm-hmm. And then so much of autism in general is confusing. And so much of what my son goes through of having these regressions, there's so much mystery and there's sadness and there's beauty at the same time. Yes. And so I just wanted to sort of express all of that of I don't know. I don't understand all of this. I'm tired of all of this. But I want you to know, my son, that I love you, above all things. Are you, what's the name tag you need to wear? I don't know. Mm-hmm. What do all these waves mean of your gains and your losses? I don't know. Are you normal or should we celebrate that? I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know what to say about this, but here's what I know is that you're loved. And so we went out to the beach and we filmed it. Actually, this is kind of crazy. We filmed part of it, and my friend Robert, he got his finger stuck in his drone, and it almost broke his finger. We had to shut the whole filming down and drive an hour and a half back home. And I was thinking, we did not get everything. This is so sad. And then he almost lost all the footage. All of this, everything's crashing like crazy. We didn't get as much footage as we needed anyway, but everything that we had crashed and nothing was saved. And we're like, what is going on? And so I'm talking with my wife and then with his wife, Wendy, and they're both like, you know what? I am not one to talk quickly about spiritual warfare, things like that, because some of that gets so overplayed. Right. They said, I think we need to press into this because I think that this is going to be a much bigger deal than we realize. And I think we absolutely need to back out to the coast tomorrow. It's a long drive, but back out to the coast and do it again and get the rest of this footage. And so we pressed in and we're like, okay, fine. We were so tired, but we drove out again. We filmed it again. And this time, everything worked. And then all the other footage was restored. Nothing was lost somehow. Oh. And then, so it was really crazy. And when we finally put it out, it just caught fire immediately, and it was got a million views in 4 days or something like that, and which was a big, especially a big deal because I didn't have a big following or anything like that, so it caught on the traditional viral way, and the coolest thing is that people started in the thread on that video started posting pictures of their children and saying, this is my son and he's beloved too. And so there are thousands of comments and beautiful pictures of these lovely children. And so every once in a while it starts circulating again. Just yesterday, because Autism Awareness Day, it started circulating again. And it's really cool and beautiful to see. The thing that I have heard so many times from it is, it was so sad, but it was so hopeful and joyful at the same time. And so that having that sort of combination of this is hard, but it's beautiful. And that's sort of where the book, Aching Joy, and the title sort of came from of, this bittersweet reality that we're in. And if we can embrace the aching, if we can embrace the hard times, we can also embrace the beauty. That was a really long answer.
No, I love it. And I'm so glad that you dove in and gave us some of the details because it is an incredible movie. it moves you. And I'm sure it moves more than people that are just on the autism spectrum, but it kind of gives you a glimpse into what life with these kids is like, you know? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's what makes it so relatable. And you're right, it does go perfectly with your title of Aching Joy of your book. Just incredible, heartfelt. They're loved, they're cherished, and they're unique and different, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, it's so fantastic. Well, do you have a favorite Bible verse you could share that has gotten you through your tough times?
Yeah, I hang out in the Psalms a lot, and because there's so much, expressing the rawness and expressing the beauty, expressing the longing. But in this season, one of the things that's just kind of became a summary for me was actually not in Psalms. It was in Romans 12:12, which is rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer. So having those things, having hope and tribulation, having rejoicing in hard times, being there, and it's just be present in all of it. Be present. Don't skip over the joy. Don't skip over the hard times. Be present. And be present in talking to God about all of it. So I think that verse sort of summarizes my journey in many ways, as I didn't know how to do that early on. And I'm still on my journey. I'm actually on a journey now of embracing joy more and trying to understand more, what does joy look like, and does joy always have to have pain in it? What about sometimes about just pure joy? These are new, things that I'm still trying to discover as I go forward. But I love that verse: rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer.
It's perfect. It's a perfect theme for life, right?
Yeah, it is. It's pretty great.
Yeah. I mean, and it's important to cling to hope even when you can't see it, trusting that God does see it. Yeah, that's pretty important. When you mentioned being able, do you have to have the sorrow to have the joy? It reminded me when I was a teenager, one of my friend's grandparents told me that emotions are kind of like a pendulum.
Yeah.
And if you swing one way and feel great joy, you also have the capacity to swing the other way and feel great sorrow. So the greater the sorrow, the greater the joy.
I like that.
And I really liked that comparison. I'd never thought about emotions that way before, but I've found that to be true as I've gone through life and experienced greater sorrows than I had felt when I was a teenager. And yet I've also felt greater love and hope than I felt when I was a teenager as well. So I think as we go through life and experience these great hard things that drag us through the depths of sorrow and despair, we have to remember that pendulum will also swing back the other way.
Right.
And cling to that hope, because sometimes we are on that sorrow side of the pendulum for a while.
Right.
Darn it all.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we think that we can protect ourselves by becoming a little bit numb. But when we do that, we miss out on the beauty. I think that's a great picture, that pendulum.
Yeah.
I think that's really good. One of the things I say in my book is that you can't numb one side of your heart only. And I think that's what I tried to do early on, is sort of numb that pain and mute everything. And then what that did is it numbed everything. I was like, okay, I'm just not going to feel that. I'm not going to be able to rejoice, or even, rejoice in my other kids, even, or rejoice in my family, rejoice in the things that God was doing. Just even rejoicing in simple good times. I wasn't able to do that because I had numbed my heart. And it was as I was able to experience more pain that I was able to experience more beauty. So I think that's a really good picture.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And And feeling numb is a really good description of how it feels sometimes. So you're not alone in feeling that way.
Right.
But I had somebody else tell me, and I can't even remember who it was, that it's important to lean into the pain and feel it fully. Because it's real and it's a part of living and learning, and it may not be what we want to feel at the time, but it's real. So,
it's not what we want. I mean, it seems so counterproductive. And again, you have to fight through some of the other voices that are telling you, you should just be happy. What are you doing? And like, this happens in the church too. Like, no, I've got the joy down in my heart, right?
That's right.
I'm inside out. Remember this one? I'm inside, outside, upside down. I'm happy all the time.
Yeah.
We used to sing that in Sunday school.
Yes.
And I'm like, man, why didn't we sing that song? Like, our kids should sue us for religious malpractice. That is just not true. There's great sadness in this world, and we're just going to have to know how to deal with that.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you debunked that myth too, because I think growing up, I felt if I was just good enough and followed God as best I could, that it would all be happy. And so I think when I crashed after Nathan was diagnosed, I was like, wait, this isn't how it's supposed to work. But then you go back and in the scriptures, and I'm like, okay, where's proof of that? And there's nowhere. You read story after story in the scripture of person after person who goes through hard times. I mean, think of poor Joseph in Egypt alone. Holy smokes.
Yeah, I know.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
There's a man who went through a lot of hard things, you know, and he was good and he was faithful and obeyed everything his dad said. And so I think once I studied in the scriptures to try to find, okay, where does it say if I obey God that everything's going to be hunky-dory? It's not there.
Right. In fact, Jesus tells us, right, in this life you will have trouble. You know, it's right there. And like that certainly played out in Jesus's life. That played out in, you know, according to tradition, 11 of the 12 disciples were martyred.
Yes.
So like this life is full of difficulties. We have to be able to face that. And we have to be able to face it in ourselves and say, okay, this is hard. I'm just going to say this is really, really hard. This isn't the way it turned out. And I have to know how to move on. And the way you move on is by dealing with it, admitting it's there, working through it with God, working through it with yourself. Like it's just the only way. Otherwise, you're going to be living in like perpetual disillusionment. And that's just not fun. It's not fun. Certainly not fun for people around you.
No. No. So I love that this is where our conversation has taken us, because it's so true of life. And so the point is, well, some people might then question, well, why should I believe it all? You know, what do you tell people that if I'm going to have hard times, why should I even believe in God? How would you answer that?
Oh, man. Well, I guess part of it is that it's not all about me. And it's not all about, you know, this current present moment. You know, if I want to believe something just so I can be happy and not experience hard times, there are better ways to do that than believing in God. Let's make lots of money and let's try to preserve ourselves and let's surround ourselves with comfort and insulate ourselves from sadness. Like you can do that, but are you living according to reality? I don't think so. I still believe, because I think the Christian faith has the truest description of the narrative I see all around me, in that we were built for love, we were built for relationship, we were built for beauty and life, and all of that has been damaged. And so we experience deep, deep pain. But Christ has come. He's come for us. He's given us a taste of redemption, and he has restored us, and now that process of restoration is going to go on, and one day it's going to be complete. So that means one day everything that has every injustice is going to be turned around, and one day the things that hold my son back are going to be gone, and he's going to be able to speak and sing and rejoice and say everything that was on his heart. And until that day, we move on and we press forward and we play a part in that restoration. The Christian faith gives me that narrative and it matches everything around me. That's why I believe. It's not because it gets me through every little second or makes me feel better. Sometimes it makes me feel bad. Sometimes it prohibits me from doing things that I would kind of like to do. And it's not about that. It's not about the happiness. It's about reality. It's about there really is a God up there who has deep love and plans for us. And his son really did give himself in redemption for us so that we can be with him forever together. That's what I see around me. That's why I still believe. It's certainly not tied very well to my happiness all the time.
Yeah. Oh, that's perfect. And I too have found myself at times looking forward to that day when I can speak to my Nathan and we can talk and have a normal conversation.
Yeah.
And autism won't hamper him anymore.
Yeah.
And so I think that is what gives me the hope to keep going. I look forward to that day with such joyful anticipation. I really do. Like, I'll get teary if I talk about it too much.
I know.
But,
and I think that's right and good for us to hope for that day,
Yeah.
Because I think with, like, how much does he want to say to you,
Yeah.
And you said before, you can see it in his eyes sometimes, like he wants to say, there's more there. And I experienced the same thing with Jack. You look at him and there's something there and he wants to be able to let it out and he can't. His body will not cooperate. And that's not always going to be that way.
No.
So it's right and good for us to hope for that day. I had a chapter in my book called the in-between country when I talk about that. And it was the only part of the book that I wept while I was typing, was just imagining my son being free of all of that, of his anxiety, his extreme anxiety, his OCD, all of these things that hold him back. And one day he is going to be free of that. And I have great hope and great faith that day is going to.
Oh, that's like a perfect note to end on. I mean, how can we top that? Oh, my word. Well, Jason, you have been so kind in sharing so much with us. How do people connect with you? Because I know this message is going to resonate.
Yeah. Easiest way probably is on my Facebook writer page. It's Jason Hague, last name Hague, Jason Hague Writer. Or my website is jasonhague.com. And certainly they can find my book on Amazon or anywhere else. Just look for Aching Joy.
Perfect. That is incredible. Well, there you have it, folks. Cling to hope, cling to joy, and you'll make it in this life. Thank you, Jason, for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to today's show. I know that there are many of you out there that are going through a hard time, and I hope you found things that have been useful today as you listen to the podcast. If you would like to access the show notes from today's podcast, visit my website. It is storiesofhopepodcast.com. That is where you'll find favorite quotes from today's episode and shareable memes. And those are fun because you can share them with your friends on social media. You will also find the links mentioned throughout today's episode, so you don't have to remember what those were. And also all the tips that were shared. Sometimes tips are shared so much throughout an episode you forget. What were those great things? So go to the show notes, storiesofhopepodcast.com, to look up these fantastic resources. If someone kept coming to mind during today's episode, perhaps that means that you should share this with them. Maybe there was a story shared or a tip that they really, really need to hear. So go ahead and share this episode with them. May God bless you, especially if you are struggling, with hope to carry on and with the strength to keep going when things get tough. Remember to walk with Christ, and He will help bear that burden. Above all else, remember, God loves you.